We're now on Daf Mem Zayin Omid Beis, and we're going to learn a Mishnah in Me'ilah, which presents the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva with regard to the Psul Yotze, as to whether or not the machshava of the Zrika has an impact on that which was Yotze. Emurei Kodshim Kalim Sheyotzu Lifnei Zrikas Domim Now, there's an inverse relationship in the laws of Me'ilah between Kodshim Kalim and Kodshei Kodshim. In Kodshei Kodshim, Me'ilah applies before Zrika. After the Zrika, there's no Me'ilah. In Kodshim Kalim, it's just Fakir, it's just the opposite. There's no Me'ilah until after Zrika. Let me just go over that one more time, make sure I said it right. In Kodshei Kodshim, there's no Me'ilah after Zrika. In Kodshim Kalim, there's Me'ilah only after Zrika. Now, the Emurim of Kodshim Kalim have to be Nikrav al Gabi Mizbeach, like the Emurim of all Karbonos. That which goes on the Mizbeach is called Kodesh Lashem. So, for example, in Kodshim Kalim, you have the Emurim that are brought on the Mizbeach, and then you have the Basar, which is eaten by the Bailim and the Kohanim. So, therefore, as far as Basar is concerned, there's no Me'ilah in Kodshim Kalim, as far as the Basar is concerned. Why? Because the Basar is now given over to the Bailim to eat. And it's not Kodesh Lashem. So you're not stealing from God, so to speak. I'm just using that as a phrase. Don't quote me on that. But as far as the Emurim are concerned, although the Emurim cannot be brought on the Mizbeach until after Zrika, so at that point it just has the status of Kodshim Kalim, and that's not Kodesh Lashem. But after Zrika, the Emurim are now designated exclusively for Hakrav al Gabi Mizbeach. Then it becomes Kodesh Lashem. So now Me'ilah in Kodshim Kalim, with regard to the Emurim, is dafka generated by Zrika. In Kodshim Kodshim is going to go the opposite, that the Zrika removes Me'ilah. Now, what happened here in the Mishnah in Me'ilah? The Emurim were taken out of the Azara. And that happened before the Zrika. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ein Molin Bahem. Rabbi Eliezer says that Me'ilah in Kodshim Kalim only applies after Zrika. But the Zrika is meaningless because the Emurim were taken out. And Rabbi Eliezer holds that Zrika can only be effective on that which is kosher. But that which is possible, because it was taken out of the Azar, there's no efficacy of efficacy, I guess is the word of Zrika. So now we're saying that although in Emurim Zrika generates Me'ilah, because then it becomes Kodesh Lashem and has to be brought on the Mizbeach, but in this case, argues Rabbi Eliezer, and it's very intuitive, there cannot be Me'ilah. Why? Because the Zrika is ineffective on the Emurim, because what impact could the Zrika have on the Emurim when the Emurim are possible. They were taken out of the Azara. Furthermore, again, Rabbi Eliezer is just fearing ice, that which is, the next stage. Ein chayavin aleh mishum pigul noser v'tameh. Right? None of the other prohibitions, like pigul, for example, if let's say the zrika was done with a machshav of chutzes manu, there's no pigul over here because Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that zrika cannot affect that which is possible. And the emurim were taken out of the azar. Rabbi Akiva omer molen b'hem chayav aleh mishum pigul noser v'tameh. Because Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that Yotze is different than every other psul. Every other psul is begufo. But here, we're talking about only a psul Yotze, which is sort of like an extraneous outside of the, the actual basa of the emurim, the chalavim and so forth, the emurim. And therefore, it's as if the emurim was still in the azara as far as the zrika impacting pigul and also the dinim of me'ila. Because as we said before, as far as emurim and kodshim kalim are concerned, it's the zrika that generates me'ila. And this zrika will generate me'ila despite the fact that the emurim were taken out of the azara. So that's, again, the source for the machlokes that was mentioned on Amud Aleph between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. Okay. Now, in the light of this machlokes, as Rav Sheshes presents it, we're now going to go back to Rav Shmuel, who had the suffix, and we're going to assume that Rav Shmuel's suffix is dafka according to Rabbi Akiva, which we call the third Tana. Now let's understand the two tzadim in which Rav Shmuel vacillates about these two tzadim in the light of Rabbi Akiva. Midas zrikas pigul kaval alechem bepigul biyotze. Since we know that according to Rabbi Akiva, there is a psul pigul that's chal on the lechem with the zrika of machshavas chutzes mano, even though the lechem left the azara. Kibasar. Now, I think the word kibasar means that let's say you had basar the karban, in this case the shnei kvasim, and it did not leave the azara. If it did not leave the confines of the azara, then the zrika of chutz lizmano would generate pigul on the basar. And now we're saying that the lechem, even though it left the azara, according to Rabbi Akiva, is still subject to the pigul through the machshav of zrika because it's not a psul begufa, as we said. Now let's take it one step further. Zrika shalol lishma nami shari leila lechem. Should we say now that since you can have, according to Rabbi Akiva, a zrika that will, in the negative sense, which is called li'isur, generate and be effective as far as the lechem, which is yotze, is therefore the zrika now could effectuate a matir. We're going now to the heter part, as far as the shtel lechem. O dilma, or should we say no? L'chumra amrina, l'kula amrina. When does Rabbi Akiva establish that the psul yotze does not remove the shtel lechem from the impact of the zrika? That's only l'chumra when the zrika was done with a machshav of chutzes mano and it effectuates pigul. And now Rabbi Akiva is going to go l'chumra and he's going to say that the zrika of pigul, of chutzes mano, can effectuate a chalashem pigul on the shtel lechem. But lakula, to say now that the zrika itself, which was shalol lishma, is going to be valid to be matir the shtei lechem, that far Rabbi Akiva didn't go. And Rabbosai, up until this point, I think my head is above water. Now the going gets rough. This is Rav Papa. Maskiflo Rav Papa. Rav Papa, this is the part that I do know. Rav Papa is going to make a distinction between lechem, the shtei lechem that was yotze at the time between shchita and zrika, meaning after the shchita, the lechem was yotze, but he's going to entertain the possibility of another scenario where even though it was yotze, it was brought back into the azor before the zrika. Maskif lo Rav Papa. Rav Papa is going to object to this interpretation of the suffix of Rav Shmuel based on Rav Sheshes. Mimai, how do you know that the mitzius, the reality, the scenario which is presented by the Mishnah Meila as the subject of the controversy between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva is Isnu Ibroi Pligi, where at the time of the Zrika, the Shtei Alechem are outside the Azara. Dilma, perhaps, but it Isnu Ibroi L'Kuliyama Lo Pligi the Ein Zrika Moel Silyotze. Maybe even Rabbi Akiva would agree that you cannot effectuate Pigul through a Zrika if at the moment of that Zrika, which was done with the Machshavas Chutzuz Mano, the Shtei Alechem are outside the Azara. Where does Rabbi Akiva disagree with Rabbi Eliezer? That's only in a case where Dilma b'de isnu ibra yakul yamal pligdein zikumeles. But where do they argue? Behadar ailinu pligi, when the Shtei Alechem were taken out of the Azor after Shchita, but before the Zrika, they were brought back into the Azor. Now let's understand the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer Savala Kerebi the Omar Shchita Makadsha. We're going now basically with Rava's approach to Rebbe that Shchita really generates the upgrade for the Shtei Alechem from Kedushas Domim to Kedushas Guf. The Ifsalu Lahu Biyotze. Rabbi Eliezer is going to say now that you have Kedushas Haguf. Why? Because according to Rava's interpretation, at least of Rebbe, the Shchita upgrades the Shtei Alechem from Kedushas Domim to that of Kedushas Guf, and now there's a psul of Yotze. There's no psul of Yotze, as we said over and over again, with regard to Kedushas Domim. Rabbi Akiva, however, holds Ki Rabbi Eliezer, Reb Shimon, and that means that you need Kol HaSiyos, that all the Asiyos from Shchita until Zrika have to be done in a valid way, Lishman. The Yom HaShchita, Yom HaKat per se, without the Zrika, is not going to generate Kiddush. And therefore the status of the Shtei Alechem is that of Kedushas Domim, because there was no effective, valid Zrika to complete the Kol HaSiyos, to be Makadish the Shtei Alechem and upgrade them to Kedushas Guf, is therefore Lo Bifsalu B'Yotze. Because if Rabbi Akiva is standing on the shoulders of Rabbi Eliezer Reb Shimon, then the status of the Shtei Alechem after a valid Shchita but before a valid Zrika is that of Kedushas Domim. And if it's Kedushas Domim, there's no Psul of Yotze. And now the Gemara is going to reject Rav Papa. Hi, man. You want to tie up Rabbi Akiva and say he's standing on the shoulders of Rabbi Eliezer Reb Shimon if I could identify Rabbi Akiva with Rebbe, and again, I'm going to go with Rava that it means there's a full-fledged Kedushas Haguf that's generated by the Shchita, when the Shchita was a valid Shchita. Hainu deka Amar Rabbi Akiva. Now I understand Rabbi Akiva who says, the Kachi Lahu B'Shchita. The Asya Zrika Kavalu B'Pigel. Right? The Shtei Alechem has now been upgraded through the Shechita to a level of Kedush Saguf, and once there's Kedush Saguf, the Zrika of Chutz Zmano could now effectuate Pigel. If we accept Rav Papa's presentation that Rabbi Akiva is standing on the shoulders of Rabbi Shimon, who holds that Zricha lo Makadsha, that Shechita alone is not enough to be Makadish to Shtei Alechem, because we need Asiyah of Kol Hasiyos. Is Rikas Pigel mi Makadsha? Are you entertaining the possibility that a Zrika that was done with the Machshav of Chutz's Mano could now be meaningful to be mashlim, to effectuate that last, how should I say, makav patish, to upgrade the kiddush of the Shtei Alechem to that of Kedushas Haguf? Ve'omar Rav Gidol Amar Rav, Srikas Pigel Eina Mevia Lidei Me'ila, Ve'eina Motzia Midei Me'ila, Eina Mevia Lidei Me'ila Be'muri Kochim Kalim. Right, we said that when is there Me'ila generated on the Emurim of Kochim Kalim? That's only with Zrika, but now he did a Zrika of Chutz Lizmano, and that cannot effectuate Me'ila. And in the case of Kochei Kochim, Eina Motzia Midei Me'ila, right, we said that Punkfaker, that in Kochei Kochim, the mafkia of Me'ila is the Shechita, is the Zrika. The Zrika was now done Chutz Lizmano, and therefore it's a Zrika of Pigel. It's not a valid Zrika at all. It doesn't register on the Richter scale, and it certainly cannot generate a Heter Me'ila on Kochei Kochim. It's therefore we see from Rav Gidol that a Zrika with a Machsheves Chutz Lizmano is not considered a Zrika. So how can Papa say that a Zrika with a Machsheves Chutz Lizmano of Pigel could now sanctify, be Makadesh, the Shtei Alechem? But Lavi Tosef Rav Gidol Amarav. However, if you know the sugya in Me'ila Daf Gimel, you'll know that they never accepted Rav Gidol Amarav. So therefore, we can reinstate Rav Papa, and we have the option of explaining Rabbi Akiva as Rav Papa explained it, meaning that it was inside the Azor, went out of the Azor, and came back into the Azor. Okay, let's just see. Okay, we still have about 9 minutes. I think we didn't do so badly. I don't know if you're following me. I know it's early in the morning, so it's after a late night Thursday night, it's hard to to concentrate on such a complicated sugya with so many different factors. But we tried. And I think we did a decent job. I could spend a full day preparing a daf like this, if not 2 days. I'm not looking forward to Shabbos where I have Mem Ches. I mean, Mem Ches is even more complicated. Anyway, so now we go back to the sugya on Omed Aleph. And the question is, the linkage, as we said before, between the Shnei Kvasim and the Shtei Halechem, which is effectuated by the Shechita. And therefore, if after the Shechita, the Shtei Halechem gets lost or destroyed, then the halach is that the lambs, the 2 Kvasim, have to go the way of all flesh. Boy, Mine Rabbi Yomi Rabbi Zera, Kivse Atzer Sheshchatan Lishman V'Ovid Halechem. So after the Shechita was done Lishman, but now the Lechem is gone. Maushi Yisrok Daman Shalo Lishman Lahatir Basav Achil. This is very paradoxical. At this moment in time, before the Zrika, the Shtei Alechem are lost. And therefore, the Kivsei Atzeres are gone. Let them die. Because since the Shechita was done Lishman, it links up the Shtei Alechem with the Kvasim. If the Shtei Alechem are gone, then the Kvasim are gone. And by the way, that's true even according to Ben Nanas. If you remember that Ben Nanas was the one who said that it works in one direction, and the Shtei Alechem is not Ma'akev the Kvasim, So who cares if the Shtei Lechem got lost? But the answer is that even Benanis would agree that once the Shechita generates a linkage between the Shtei Lechem and the Kvasim, then in the event that the Shtei Lechem are lost, then the Kvasim are no good. Comes along Rabbi Yirmiyah with a new idea, a revolutionary idea. Maybe we could still salvage the Kvasim. How can we salvage the Kvasim? You'll change the status of the Kvasim by setting up a Zrika of Shalol Lishma. Imagine, if he would do the Shechita Lishma, then for sure the Kvasim are gone, because the Shtei Lechem are gone, and they were there at the time of the Shechita. But now comes along Rabbi Yirmiyah with a Kudz, an Ayazach. Paradoxically, a Machshav of Shalol Lishma is going to be Matir the Kvasim. The Kvasim are on their way to be buried. No, we're going to salvage them. How? With a Machshava of Shalol Lishma. And that's going to be Matir the Basar. So now the Kohen is allowed to eat the Basar of the Shnei Kvasim because it changes its identity. Meaning, its original identity is totally bound. In Yiddish, we say it's abundant, it's totally bound with the Shtei Lechem. And therefore, the Shtei Lechem are gone, then the Kvasim are gone. But now, we're going to change the nature of that Shnei Kvasim, make it into a classic Shlomim. And how do we do so with the Machshava of Shalol Lishma? And now, it becomes Shlomim, independent of the Shtei Lechem. And paradoxically, now, the Zrika could be Matir, the Basar, Lachilas Kohen. Amalei, what are you talking about? Reb Zera says, what are you, off your rocker? This is absolutely antithetical to any logic. You can't tell me that if he did the Zrikas Damim Lishma, then the Kvasim have to go down the river. But if he does the Zrika of the Kvasim Shalol Lishma, then we can eat the Basar. And the Gemara now is going to go through a whole sugya back and forth to try to prove that this paradoxical scheme and model of Rabbi Yirmiyah is really so. V'lo, I'll prove it to you. Hare Pesach Kodem Chatzos, if he went ahead and he brought a Korban Pesach before Chatzos, the time for the Shchitas Korban Pesach is after Chatzos on Yudalit, Di'enu Kosher L'Shmo. If he went ahead and he did the avoda of the Korban Pesach, Lishmo, L'Shem Pesach, and it's before Chatzos, then ain't no kosher. Just throw it out. However, the kosher Shalol Lishmo. We can change the identity of the Korban Pesach and make it into a Korban Shlomim. And a Korban Shlomim before Chatzos is kosher. So you see that we could already play this game and introduce a Shalol Lishma and change the nature of the carbon in such a way that now the carbon which was meant to be thrown out is now kosher. Reb Zera says, what are you talking about? That's not a proof. Hachi ka'emina. When Reb Zera objected to the very premise of Rabbi Yirmiyah that you could have a situation where Shalol Lishma is kashas it, Yeshcha davar shenira lishmo, v'nidche lishmo, v'eno kosher lishmo, v'kosher shalol lishmo. I mean, you're bringing me a proof from the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach was never nira lishmo because before Chatzos it was never nira. I'm talking about a case where at the time of the shechita of the kvasim, it was nira lishmo. Had he gone ahead with the zrika lishma, then everything would have been fine. And now you're telling me that he's going to go ahead. I'm sorry. Had he gone ahead with the shechita of lishma, it would be possible because he lost the shtei lechem, which were there at the time of the shechita. And now you're going to tell me that he's going to have a machshava shalol lishma. That's going to make it kosher. V'lo, I'm going to prove to you that even in such a case, we can apply that paradox. Varei Pesach li'achar zmano. What happens if you have a Korban Pesach and you bring it after the day of Tesvav, or for that matter any day of the rest of the year, b'shar yemos hashana, and then you could make it into a Korban Shlomim, right? If you had shechted b'shar yemos hashana l'shem Pesach, puzzle, throw it out. But if you have a machshav of shalolishma, shalolish Pesach, then it becomes a carbon shlomim. And again, at one point, it was davar shenira lishmo, meaning before Shayimos Hashana, on the 14th, if he would have had kavana lishmo for the sake of Korban Pesach, would be kosher. But now, after you get to Shayimos Hashana, paradoxically, the halacha is that a machshava of shalolishma is going to kasher up and validate the carbon because now it becomes shlamim. Hachi kaima. Now Reb Zera again clarifies why he objected to the suffix of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Yesh chadav shenira lishmo, v'nishchat lishmo. Even the shechita was done lishmo, because at that time the shtei lechem was available when he shechted the two kvasim. And then nidcha lishmo, because the shtei lechem was lost. V'eno kosher lishmo, the kosher shelo lishmo. Find me a precedent for that. Velo, there is no precedent. Valo toda, vari toda. In the case of a carbon toda, we have all the elements that are necessary for Rabbi Yirmiyah and his suffix. And the Gemara answers, no, you can't prove anything from toda because shani toda derachmana kari shlomim. The Torah calls it a carbon shlomim. This leads us to Torah Rabbanon at the bottom of Daf in Zion Amid Beis. Wish you a great Shabbos. And